On the night of March 13th, 1997 in Phoenix, Arizona, there was a strange event that sparks much debate to this day amongst UFO enthusiasts, skeptics, and researchers. That night, numerous witnesses observed a formation of bright lights gliding silently across the night sky. Some thought it was aliens, while others thought it was something more mundane, such as military exercises or a hoax. Two men named David Holthouse and Michael Kiefer were among the witnesses of the Phoenix Lights event. They both described seeing a V-shaped formation of lights slowly moving across the sky from north to south. The lights had a yellowish hue to them and appeared high in the sky, but the thing that creeped the men out the most was the dead silence in the night. David believed that the lights were all connected, while Michael thought that they appeared to all be separated. Additionally, other witnesses reported varying numbers for the amount of lights. Some said there were 6, while others said 7. One of the key witnesses to the event was named Mitch Stanley, an amateur astronomer who happened to own a high-powered telescope. On the night of March 13th, Stanley observed the lights closely as they moved and stated that the lights split into 2 under what he discerned as square-shaped wings. Stanley was adamant that the objects he saw were small planes. Despite the abundance of eyewitness accounts and expert opinions, the origin of the craft behind the Phoenix Lights event remains unknown. The light's brightness and absence of transponder signals also fueled various speculations. Again, some thought that these were military aircraft, potentially A-10s or T-37 fighter trainers, flying in formation. However, no military installation has stepped forward to claim responsibility, and those that are hard stuck on this theory of military involvement suggest that they were conducting some sort of secret testing that they want to keep under wraps. During her winter break from Mesa Junior College in San Diego, California, 19-year-old Rachel Cooke returned to her family's home in Georgetown, Texas to spend the holidays with her parents and younger sister. Each morning, Rachel would embark on a 6-mile run through the neighborhood, which was a routine that she had followed ever since she was a child. She took the exact route hundreds of times, so every detail about her path was deeply ingrained into her mind. On Thursday, January 10th, 2002, Rachel woke up to an empty house. Around 9:15 a.m., Rachel's boyfriend, Greg West, called her from San Diego. It was during this call where Rachel mentioned that she was going to head out for a run soon. She promised to call him back when she returned, but this call never took place. Rachel left the house after their conversation. Somewhere along her usual route, Rachel disappeared without a trace, and no one has seen her since. That afternoon, Rachel's father, Robert Cooke, returned home early from work to take Rachel shopping for her cousin's upcoming wedding. But he was surprised to find the house empty and quiet, with no sign of Rachel. Concerned, Robert noticed that Rachel's purse and cell phone were still at home, which was unusual as she typically carried them everywhere. This discovery made Robert extremely uneasy. While home during this winter break, Rachel would sometimes take on shifts as a waitress at a local restaurant in Georgetown. When Robert notified his wife Janet about their missing daughter, she called the restaurant to check if she was there. To her relief, the restaurant informed her that Rachel was indeed working that night. Janet and her husband went to sleep that night expecting to see their daughter the next morning. But once the next day rolled around, they still never saw Rachel. As the hours passed with no sign of her, Janet's anxiety returned. She decided to call the restaurant once more to find out what happened to Rachel. To her dismay, Janet discovered that there had been a mix-up. The Rachel who worked the shift was an entirely different person. Rachel Cooke was not at the restaurant the previous day. With Rachel still missing, her parents and sister, Joanne, began searching through her belongings for any hints to her whereabouts. Their fears grew when they discovered that her workout clothes and running shoes were missing. They now assumed that Rachel never made it back home after going out for her run. In their minds, this could only mean that something terrible had happened, so they went out searching for Rachel. Over 24 hours had passed since anyone had heard from Rachel. In an attempt to find her, the family finally contacted authorities. Law enforcement tried to calm the family down by saying that Rachel was more than likely just out with friends. But instead of easing their minds, these words had the opposite effect. The Cookes felt as though they were not being heard and grew frustrated. Rachel's parents highly doubted that Rachel would have stayed overnight at someone else's residence, let alone without her purse or cell phone. Eventually, the family was able to get in touch with one of Rachel's friends, who informed them that the two had made plans to meet up the night that she disappeared. And as you could probably guess, this unnamed friend said that Rachel never showed up to their meeting spot. Rachel's boyfriend was also called, and he shared that Rachel was supposed to call him back, but he never got such a call. Now, at this point, the Cooke family thought that law enforcement were dragging their feet, so they took matters into their own hands and organized a large search party. The next day, authorities stopped by Robert and Janet's home and realized that the couple had escalated the situation on their own. They worried that this search party could contaminate evidence that may lead to Rachel. When law enforcement started their investigation, they officially stated that there was a high likelihood that foul play was involved. Investigators spent the following Sunday retracing the steps of Rachel and her family. They found that Robert had left the house around 7 a.m. while Janet and Rachel's sister had left at 8 a.m. During that time, Rachel was still asleep on the family couch in the living room. Then around 9 to 9:15 a.m., Rachel had that call with her boyfriend, who again is named Greg. As soon as Greg learned about Rachel's disappearance, he got on a plane to Texas from San Diego. And as soon as he landed, investigators wanted to question him, but he was later determined to not be a suspect. A witness that learned about the case told authorities that they saw Rachel on her run at about 10:45 a.m. She was running towards her parents' house. This observation was made about 200 yards from the Cooke residence. Then, the family gave authorities an interesting detail. They told them that the entire household had a knack for leaving the front door unlocked. The possibility of an intruder now arose, but there was no evidence to suggest that a stranger had entered the home. Another witness stated that they saw a white Camaro in the neighborhood around 11 a.m. This neighbor took note of the vehicle since it seemed as though it was driving around aimlessly without a destination. There were two men inside of the car that were estimated to be about 18 to 25 years old. Authorities promptly tracked down the car and identified the two men, who were teenagers. The pair had skipped school that day, and after extensive questioning, they too were ruled out as suspects. About a week after Rachel's disappearance, police released a sketch of a new person of interest. He was a white male, described as being in his early to mid-20s with black hair and a broad build. The man was seen driving two different vehicles at different points. One was a white Nissan and the other being a Toyota pickup truck. No significant leads came in as a result of this sketch though. The case gradually faded into obscurity as clues were exhausted. Not a single piece of physical evidence had been obtained during the investigation, despite having a search party of well over 200 and interviewing several hundred people. Then in January of 2021, authorities stated that they were trying to identify a person of interest that lived in Georgetown at the time of Rachel's disappearance. They stated that the man lived in a number of different cities in Texas through the years, with his current whereabouts being unknown. This individual was never found. And afterwards, Rachel's case just went cold yet again. She was last seen in 2002. At the time, she was about 5 foot 2 inches tall and weighed about 110 pounds. When she disappeared, she was wearing a green sports bra, gray shorts, white shoes, and had a gray shirt tied to her waist. In Spanaway, Washington on June 26, 1994, 25-year-old Michael Johnston and 19-year-old Rochelle Robinson visited a friend's house for a game night primarily focused around the Magic the Gathering card game. The two left at about 11:30 p.m. that night but never returned home. Instead, they were both found dead on the 27th, and there were clear signs that this was a murder case. Michael, a married father of two, lived in Puyallup with his family. Rochelle, employed at a Spanaway Taco Bell, was a computer enthusiast and aspiring teacher, living with her family in that same city. The two met through classes at Pierce Community College and quickly became friends, bonding over their shared interest in Magic the Gathering. Michael frequently visited Rochelle at her home, and the two's friends later revealed to authorities that they had a romantic relationship. This detail led to several investigators theorizing that the murders were a result of jealous rage. However, some disagree. Michael was found dead at around 4:45 a.m. on the 27th, less than 6 hours after he and Rochelle had left their friend's house. He had sustained both a knife wound and gunshot wound. His body was discovered next to Rochelle's 1988 Mazda, which was parked close to a popular shooting range that was also known as a sort of lover's lane. Rochelle's body was located around 5 p.m. the same day. She was tucked away behind some shrubs along a remote access road about 5 miles from Michael's body. Rochelle had several brutal stab wounds as well. Based on eyewitness accounts and evidence from the crime scene, authorities came up with the following sequence of events as a possibility. The couple had left their friend's house in separate cars, with Rochelle later picking up Michael from the Spanaway Junior High School parking lot near her home. His car was found in the same lot. Police believe that after 1 a.m., they parked Rochelle's car on the secluded road near the shooting range where they were alone until the killer arrived. Upon discovering them in the backseat of the car, the killer forced them to hastily dress, with Rochelle wearing Michael's t-shirt inside out when her body was found. Police speculate that they were then forced out of the car at gunpoint. Forensic evidence indicates that Michael was handcuffed and forced to kneel in front of Rochelle's car. He was then killed, with Rochelle forced to watch it all happen. They also believe that Michael was a secondary target, with Rochelle being the primary focus of the attack. Detective Fred Reinick's investigation concluded that the assailant then drove Rochelle to a secluded road 5 miles away, where he proceeded to take her life and conceal her body. The nature of Rochelle's murder led investigators to theorize that the culprit was close to her, or at the very least knew her. Possibly an ex-boyfriend who was someone who had a romantic interest in the young woman. According to Rochelle's friend, Kevin McMichael, she said she had a feeling someone was stalking her. The man first started appearing at her workplace about 4 months before her death. Rochelle confided in a coworker that she had gone to lunch with this so-called stalker once, after which he began harassing her. She believed that he had followed her home on several occasions and recounted instances of him showing up at her workplace and other places she frequented, where he would stare at her until she left. This coworker did confront the man at one point, telling him to leave Rochelle alone, and it seemed to have worked as he promptly left and wasn't seen again for a brief stint. A description of this suspect was given to police, but nobody has been able to tie the sketch with an identity or name. After about a year of investigating, leads and clues seem to have all been used up. So Michael's now widow, Janet, hired a private investigator named Jim Wright to help keep the case alive. Janet also revealed that both she and Michael had life insurance policies of about $250,000 each. Furthermore, she stated she was well aware of Michael's secret relationship with Rochelle, but she kept silent. When police questioned Janet, they ultimately determined that she was not the culprit. The investigation took an interesting turn when investigators sought the help of a psychic named Nancy Meyer. Nancy actually has assisted in over 300 homicide cases, so while the approach does seem rather strange and unconventional, authorities were at a point where they were down to try anything. Nancy requested that no details regarding the case be revealed to her besides the actual location of the murders. She wanted it this way so that her investigation could be genuine. Nancy shared with the authorities that she knew Michael had died first, since she felt fear at the location of his death. Nancy also stated that at least 2 accomplices were involved as well. They accused Michael of breaking some sort of rule relating to some sort of occult ritual/events. Furthermore, Nancy believed that the man calling the shots was employed at a nearby teaching facility, possibly a community college or university. As for those accomplices, they were aged somewhere in their mid to late 20s. Nancy was even able to provide enough details for officials to come up with sketches of the culprits. Now, some investigators did not agree with Nancy's findings. As I shared earlier, the police seemed to be of the opinion that the person responsible was close to Rochelle, while Nancy believes that the culprits were closer to Michael. Nancy described the main culprit as being 5 foot 10 inches tall, 170 pounds with brown/blonde hair and acne. And one more detail that I left out from earlier. Kevin McMichael, the friend of Rochelle's who saw her stalker, said the guy was also driving a vehicle carrying panes of glass, which led investigators to believe that he was employed at a glass company. But looking into that rabbit hole never really resulted in anything major. Yusuf ibn Ayyub, aka Saladin, was born around 1137 to 1138 in what is now modern-day Iraq. Saladin's legacy carries many accomplishments, including the recapture of Jerusalem, but probably his greatest feat was his command over a religiously and politically split region, including Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Western Arabia. But today we're going to be talking about his death and the unknown cause of it. Saladin passed away around the age of 55 or 56. He had come down with a strange fever which lasted 2 weeks. For centuries, the illness that Saladin had has been unknown. Some suspected the plague or smallpox, while others disagreed, saying that those two would have killed him much faster. Tuberculosis and malaria were other diseases that were frequently thrown into the conversation as well. But the thing about this entry is it seems like it's one of those mysteries that is more than likely solved, but it is impossible to confirm since so much time has passed. Dr. Stephen Gluckman, who is a professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, states that he believes Saladin's cause of death was typhoid. Dr. Gluckman did say that a definitive diagnosis is likely impossible, given Saladin lived before modern diagnostic tools, but to him, he believes typhoid fits the best. And this disease was fairly common at the time in Saladin's location. In case you are not aware, typhoid is a bacterial disease that is often spread via food, water, or direct contact. Its symptoms include fatigue, stomach pain, headache, loss of appetite, and much more. Now, in the past, typhoid was actually ruled out as a possibility since Saladin was said to not have stomach pain leading up to his death. Gluckman was quoted saying, "It is really based on what the common diseases were at the time, and of those which were fatal, and of those which were fatal in a time period of around 2 weeks." Chicago's near North Side had a dark reputation in the 1910s, particularly at the intersection of Oak and Milton Street, now known as Cleveland Street. This location was named Death Corner amongst locals. It earned the name due to the high number of murders that occurred there. This neighborhood was even once considered the deadliest in the city. It was dubbed Little Sicily for its large Italian immigrant community, but others refer to it as Little Hell. This latter title was a reflection of the high volume of crime in the area. While there were many immigrants that grinded through their days to make an honest living to support their families, there were also evil extortion groups also composed of immigrants looking for opportunities to exploit the weak. These groups were known as the Black Hand. And one may think that the victim should simply go out and seek help from police, and you may be right in most cases, but these immigrants had absolutely no trust in law enforcement, which made it easy for the Black Hand to continue their work knowing that nobody was going to step in and interfere. And it is within the Black Hand where we meet the subject of this entry, the Shotgun Man. There are literally no actual images of the guy, so you guys are just gonna have to put up with whatever diabolical image I have thrown up on screen. The Shotgun Man is recognized as an assassin that worked closely with the Black Hand and is rumored to have killed over a dozen people from 1910 to 1911. 4 of which occurred within 3 days of each other. There are a few accounts of people seeing the Shotgun Man in public committing crimes. However, no one has ever come forward to report the guy. Probably for the same reason why the extortion groups were never reported. It became a situation where people believed that it would be in their best interest if they just ignored the killer and went about their day. As a result, the identity of this assassin faded away with the residents of that era. Nowadays, some even suggest that the Shotgun Man was nothing more than an urban legend. In the Gospel of Mark in the New Testament, there is an individual referred to as the naked fugitive. I'm not religious at all, so trying to make sense of some of these readings was difficult, so if I get something wrong, feel free to correct me below. The naked fugitive pops up after the arrest of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the fugitive is only mentioned briefly, yet many people are fixated on the mysterious identity of the guy. This boy, who had nothing on except for a linen cloth, followed Jesus during his arrest, and when authorities attempted to arrest the boy, he dropped this cloth and bolted away naked. Nobody really knows why the boy did what he did or his identity. Some believe that there is simply no significance at all with him, while others disagree. A number of scholars propose that the fugitive is a follower of Jesus who also witnessed his crucifixion. On the other hand, some believe that the fugitive is a literary device to get across some sort of deep theological message. Other interpretations of the fugitive include him being a symbol of the vulnerability of humanity. Tucked away within Alaska is a small town called Tok in North Star County with a population of around 1,200 residents. Being such a quiet town where nothing really happened, nobody expected to stumble upon skeletal remains that painted a picture of murder. On August 20th, 1979, a resident had encountered the remains of a man as well as strands of long brown hair along a deserted road. Police were called, and upon their arrival, they found a slew of evidence right in front of them. However, the specifics regarding most of it has never been revealed. What has been revealed is that the victim had met a violent end approximately a year earlier at the hands of another person. His remains indicated stab wounds as well as a missing left eye, hence the name One-Eyed Jack. Jack's jaw was missing, which made forensic reconstructions a bit difficult. The evidence authorities obtained pointed to a suspect already in custody in Nevada for unrelated charges. During his confinement, this individual, Jesse Burt Bishop, confessed to the murder of a hitchhiker in Alaska back in September 1978, and Jesse was more than willing to share the details. Jesse Bishop had encountered a man in Boise, Idaho, who initially planned to travel to Pendleton, Oregon. After a brief conversation, the man agreed to accompany Jesse to Alaska. According to Jesse, the man went by either John or Jack. He couldn't really remember. Jesse took note that Jack was exactly 32 years old when he pulled out his Oregon State driver's license. Jesse described him as a tall man with long brown hair and a beard. He was also a smoker and was missing his left eye. Jesse shared that the man had worked as a logger in Oregon and his injury was a result of an accident. Jack had also mentioned working at a Lincoln car dealership in Colorado or Utah and had been married at some point as well. But oddly, Jesse said that he had the feeling that the guy was telling lies at times. Anyway, deep into the drive, Jesse attacked Jack. When authorities questioned him as to why he did this, Jesse simply said that Jack was getting on his nerves. Jesse then disposed of the body on the side of the road in Tok, Alaska. Jesse's description of the man matched the evidence found at the scene, especially in terms of clothing. One-Eyed Jack was found wearing a size large Mervyn's Mark jacket with green and brown plaid, blue jeans containing 15 Canadian cents, and an orange and white marble believed to have served as a false eye. He also had on a green and white plaid shirt, a blue bandana, a white t-shirt, brown ankle lace boots with blue socks, a headband, and a black leather eye patch. Additionally, Jack carried a broken yellow pencil, 3 packs of matches, and 2 packs of Winston cigarettes. And you might be asking yourself right now, what about that driver's license? Well, it was actually never found. Jesse Bishop was later convicted for the murder of One-Eyed Jack. He pleaded guilty in court and died in 2003. Based on Jesse's information, it is widely believed that Jack led a transient lifestyle and thus may have never been registered as missing. Some of Jack's friends and relatives may have believed that he had started a new life elsewhere far away after they had lost touch with him. Around the 60s and 70s, the transient hippie lifestyle was pretty popular. Individuals often disappeared and were believed to have just wandered around. It is likely that Jack falls into the category of people who passed away without anyone being aware of his absence. There might not be anyone actively seeking information about this man at all. Over the years, several different identities have been proposed that may be Jack, one of which was a man named Stephen Chait. Stephen was a 20-year-old student at Columbia University in New York in 1972. He disappeared on March 13th after leaving his dorm room without informing his roommate. And a strange detail was that Stephen left behind some items that most people would deem important, such as his passport and several paychecks that have not been cashed yet. It was said that Stephen had been battling with depression, which led some to believe that he may have resorted to suicide. Despite extensive efforts to locate him, he remains missing. Apparently, leading up to his disappearance, Steven had changed his major as a result of his struggles with school. Steven felt as though his academic shortcomings as well as his poor mood put in unnecessary weight on his loved ones. At the time of One-Eyed Jack's discovery, Steven would be in his mid to late 20s, which does fit the age range medical officials gave for the victim. Steven's physical appearance was also very similar to Jack's. Furthermore, Steven had several scars near his left eye. This led some investigators to believe that Steven had aggravated an old injury, which led to his eye needing to be removed. But the similarities seemingly drop off there. Steven was a man with skills in the fine arts, while Jesse stated that Jack was more of a manual laborer. Another possible identity is a man named Franklin Harder who disappeared in Grangeville, Idaho in April of 1978 at the age of 25. However, nobody noticed that Franklin was missing until a week later, since he liked to keep to himself and was described as a loner. And just like with Steven, Franklin also had similar features to Jack. Now, a lot of people seem to lean towards the possibility of Franklin being Jack since he went missing in Idaho, and Jesse stated that he picked up Jack in the same state. The few images of Franklin available also show the man in clothing similar to what Jack wore. This entry refers to a show called The Robot Wars, specifically the third series titled The Third Wars. It was a show broadcasted on BBC Two from 1999 to 2000. And as you could guess from the name, the series was about robots duking it out against each other. And I had no idea until this entry that one Simpsons episode with Homer inside of a robot was based off of this show. Now, this segment isn't about one particular event, but rather a series of unresolved accidents that occurred. For example, there was one unfortunate incident during the Third Wars audition on October 20th, 1999, where a 77-kilogram robot went off course and injured a technician with its spikes, resulting in an injury that required professional treatment. This accident led to a lot of criticism, so Roboteers were shocked when this robot was still chosen to compete. A man named Martin Dawson, who was a member behind the Millie Ann Bug robot, said the following about the situation. Oh yes, and very controversial it was at the time. Here's what I remember. It's October 1999 at Elstree and it's a dark, miserable night. The afternoon was long. A robot shot off on its own in the arena and spiked one of the tech guys. All hell erupted. Filming was stopped and the audience told to go home. The rumor mill went full swing and it's believed someone, possibly in the audience, had a piece of radio kit that bled over the wavelength the robot was working on and made it take off. An ambulance took the tech guy away. I slowly packed our tools and kit and loaded my car up as Millie had gone out to Bumblebot. The particular robot that was responsible for the injury is unknown, but many thought it to be more Pandemonium, which was a robot prepped for Series 3 and also wielded a spike. However, Team Panda, the group that made this robot, stated that during the filming for More Pandemonium's audition, nothing bad had happened. This led to further investigation into other possible robots that could have caused the injury. One of these other robots was named Roadkill. Roadkill weighed in at just about 77 kilograms and was said to have several spikes on it, making it appear almost like a hedgehog. And from what I could find, there are apparently no images or videos available to the public of this robot. There are actually a lot of other events from this season that sparked controversy in the same way that this spike incident did. One of these other events was called the saw blade incident, where a robot equipped with a saw blade suddenly turned on when a crew member was inspecting it, leading to an injury. There were also disagreements within certain matches, albeit these aren't mysteries, but they just further highlight how much controversy surrounded the Third Wars. For example, in a match involving the Big Cheese, Roger Plant, one of the people who built Big Cheese, stated that his machine was beaten up an unfair amount, leading to expensive and time-consuming repairs. Now, at first this complaint might sound sort of dumb since the whole point of the show is to see these robots destroy each other. However, during this particular segment, Big Cheese was going up against what were called house robots, which were basically just throwaways that were meant to add a little bit more interaction. So what was supposed to be an easy task ended up causing Big Cheese unnecessary repairs. In the city of Swansea in Wales, there was/is a man who, for whatever reason, stands in front of traffic. He has been doing this on and off for about a decade and has become known locally as the Silent Man. And as the name would suggest, the guy doesn't say a word when he's confronted. Obviously, authorities had to get involved, and they tried to figure out the man's identity. His name is David Hampson, and he is currently in his mid-50s. Investigators spent hours trying to find out why the man was doing this. Some people got the idea that this was the beginning of some sort of act of terrorism. In 2021, David got sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. The jury determined that he was mute of malice, but after being released early, he continued with his antics and went back to blocking traffic on 3 different occasions. For this, he was sent back to jail. The man doesn't even talk to his lawyers. It was later found that David's odd actions can be traced back to 2014 when he was charged for 4 counts of willfully obstructing free passage along the highway. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, Natalee Ann Holloway was raised by her mother Elizabeth Holloway after her parents' divorce in 1993 alongside her younger brother Matthew. In 2000, Elizabeth married a businessman named George Twitty. This spurred on the family's relocation to Mountain Brook, Alabama. Following her graduation from Mountain Brook High School on May 24, 2005, Natalee went on a graduation trip to Aruba accompanied by 124 other classmates. The group of students was closely supervised by 7 chaperones, including teachers, during their trip. Now, amongst her peers, Natalee was very well known for her drinking problems. In fact, she would often skip breakfast after starting her day with cocktails. On the night of May 30th, she was last seen leaving Carlos and Charlie's bar and nightclub at 1:30 a.m. She was accompanied by 17-year-old Joran Vandersloot, who was a Dutch honor student living in Aruba. Along with Joran were his friends, Deepak and Satish Kalpoe. Natalee was supposed to catch a flight back home to Alabama that same day, but she never made it. Her luggage and passport were found in her Holiday Inn room, prompting Aruban authorities to search the island and surrounding waters, but no trace of her was found. Upon Natalee's disappearance, her parents immediately flew to Aruba. Shortly after their arrival, the Twitties informed the police about Joran Vandersloot, providing his name and address. This information was obtained from the Holiday Inn night manager, who recognized Vandersloot from security footage. Accompanied by the police, they visited Vandersloot's home. Initially, the student denied even knowing Natalee, but later he recounted a story that was confirmed by Deepak. Vandersloot claimed that they had stopped at the lighthouse area of Arashi Beach to see some sharks as Natalee requested. Afterwards, the group went back to the Holiday Inn around 2 a.m. to drop off Natalee. Right as Natalee stepped out of the car, she tripped but refused help when getting up. As they drove away, Vandersloot said he thought he saw a dark man in dark clothing approaching Natalee. The man almost looked like a fake security guard. A large search party was organized and the security cameras of the hotel were combed through with no sign of Natalee anywhere. Interestingly, there were also some reports that the cameras were not working the night when Natalee disappeared. During the search, many false leads were obtained, one of which was a blood sample in Deepak's car, which wasn't even blood. Fast forward to June 5th, 2005, former Allegro Hotel security guards Abraham Jones and Nick John were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder in connection with the disappearance of Natalee. The arrest came after statements from Joran Vandersloot and the Kalpoe brothers, who were also later arrested. Jones and John were released on June 13th when all charges against them were dropped. According to Police Commissioner Gerald Dompig, Vandersloot and the Kalpoes were prime suspects from the beginning, and surveillance tactics were used to monitor them before their arrests. One of the suspects reportedly admitted to police that something bad had happened when they took Natalee to the beach, but this allegation was not confirmed by the prosecution spokesperson. Less than a week later, Joran Vandersloot's father was also arrested after questioning. It was around this time when Joran and the Kalpoes changed their stories. This time, the Kalpoes said that they dropped off Natalee and Joran at the Marriott Hotel Beach, but Joran said that the Kalpoes dropped him off at home and left with Natalee. Investigators were leaning towards the Kalpoe story as they were thinking that Joran was trying to flip the narrative back on them before it was too late. So the Kalpos were released in July while Joran remained locked up for an additional 2 months. But Joran would also be released later on. Fast forward to 2006 and 2007, both Joran and the Kalpo brothers were rearrested on the suspicion of manslaughter and bodily harm, leading to Natalee's death. And yet again, everyone was released on November 30th as a result of a lack of evidence being filed. However, in a shocking turn of events, Beth Twitty, Natalee's mother, received a phone call from her lawyer in the year 2010. Her lawyer stated that Joran was offering to reveal the location of Natalee's body as well as the details regarding her death in return for $250,000 with an advance of $25,000. Beth agreed to the deal and arrangements were made, but not long after, the claims made by Joran were found to be fake. On May 10th, Joran received a wire transfer and he gave authorities a location. But after simply looking up this place, authorities realized that it was actually constructed after Natalee had disappeared. Joran was subsequently charged with extortion and wire fraud. In that same year, which was again 2010, specifically on May 30th, a different case led investigators to take another look at Natalee's disappearance. A business student named Flores Ramirez disappeared in Lima, Peru. After a few days of searching, investigators found Ramirez in a hotel room that was purchased by Joran Vandersloot, and it's here where authorities tracked down and arrested Joran before extraditing him to Peru. After intense questioning, Joran admitted to killing Ramirez. And it was during this exchange that Joran said that he knew where Natalee was and that she was dead. He added that the extortion attempt was made to get back at Natalee's family since the investigation into her disappearance made his life unenjoyable. His exact words were, "I wanted to get back at Natalee's family. Her parents have been making my life tough for 5 years." Joran pleaded guilty to murdering Ramirez in January of 2012 and received a 28-year prison sentence. Then in June of 2011, Natalee's biological father, Dave, requested that his daughter be declared legally dead by the state of Alabama, but his ex-wife, Beth, opposed this move. A year-long legal battle ensued between the two where, in the end, Natalee was declared dead. The case saw another development in June of 2023 when Joran was extradited from Peru to the US, where he pleaded not guilty to those charges of extortion and wire fraud back in 2010. Then in October of the same year, Joran confessed to taking the life of Natalee Holloway. Joran had used a cinder block after Natalee refused to have with him. Afterwards, he tossed her body into the ocean. And yes, this mystery is technically solved if you disregard the location of Natalee's remains. Then again, we sort of know where they are, but at the same time we don't, and it's obviously going to be impossible to find the remains. This iceberg was created back around 2021 to 2022, I want to say, and this case was only recently solved in late 2023. So I still wanted to include it. Discovered in 1908 by Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier at Phaistos is the Phaistos disc. It's a clay disc measuring approximately 16 centimeters in diameter. Its surface is covered with a series of ancient symbols arranged in a spiral pattern from the center. Despite decades of study, the writing on the Phaistos disc remains undeciphered, leading to numerous theories about its nature. While some researchers believe it represents a form of writing, others suggest it could be an artistic creation or a religious object, possibly even a game board. Composed of 61 groups of symbols, the Phaistos disc depicts a bunch of different things including animals, plants, body parts, and other random objects. Researchers can't pinpoint an exact date as to when this disc was made, but they typically agree that it can be dated to the 2nd millennium BCE. But due to the lack of archaeological context, it's tough to tie the object with a specific culture or period. The death of Australian astrophysicist Rodney Marks is regarded as one of the more peculiar cases to this day. Rodney died on May 11th, 2000 after suffering from severe illness for 36 hours. His cause of death was promptly identified as methanol poisoning. But where the mystery lies is how the poison ended up in Rodney's system. One investigator suggested the possibility that Rodney had intentionally consumed the substance. At the time, Rodney was in a station in Antarctica, so after his death, his body was kept at the station for 6 months since flights had been paused at that moment. It was during the post-mortem in Christchurch where elevated levels of methanol had been discovered in Rodney's body. Initially, it was thought that Rodney had died of natural causes, so this revelation shocked everyone at the facility. There were also these tiny needle marks along Rodney's arms, but no traces of illegal substances in his body. Rodney was known to be a binge drinker. He had Tourette's syndrome, and it was said that he drank in an attempt to cover up his symptoms. So one person suggested that Rodney may have distilled his own drink, which led to him poisoning himself. But this theory was quickly shot down as the base provided the staff with alcohol. While investigators initially thought that this was a matter of there were no other details that supported this thought. Everything in Rodney's life seemed to be headed in a positive direction. He was social and active and even built a strong relationship with a female coworker at the base. He had no financial hardships and he occupied himself by working on an important piece of academic work. Authorities struggled to obtain a list of the staff members' names as the requests were ignored, but they were eventually able to get their hands on this information on the internet. They got the names of 49 co-workers and sent them all a questionnaire. Investigators got back 13 responses. According to New Zealand police, US authorities have also had a hand in the investigation, but they refused to share what they found. One New Zealand official was quoted saying, "It is impossible to say how far that investigation went, or to what end." To this day, the circumstances revolving around how Rodney had ingested the substance remains a mystery. The case of Gregory Villemin is regarded as one of, if not the most infamous unsolved murder cases in France. This case is pretty insane and I intend on covering it in more detail in another video, so I will be leaving certain parts out in this video, but nevertheless you will still get the gist of the event. If you are well versed in the case and notice that some parts are a bit lacking, that is why. When this took place, Gregory was just 4 years old. It was October 16th, 1984 around 5 p.m. when the boy was reported missing. Gregory's mother drove all over their small village in search of him. According to her, Gregory was last seen playing in the front yard of the family's home. At about 5:30 p.m., Gregory's uncle received a disturbing phone call. The caller was anonymous, but they said that his nephew was kidnapped and left at River Villemin. The message in the call roughly translated to, "I've kidnapped the boy, I've killed him and he's in the River Villemin. I have my revenge." The river was searched and by 9 p.m. Gregory was found. His hands and feet were both tied up and he also had a woolen hat over his face. The very next day, Gregory's father, Jean-Marie, got a letter that is said to have been sent out around the time when Gregory first disappeared. In it read, "I hope you die of grief, boss. Your money won't bring back your son. Here's my revenge, you bastard." The true identity of whoever sent the letter is still unknown, but they have been given the moniker Le Corbeau, or in English, the Crow or the Raven, which is a title made famous by a 1940s French film under the same name. Investigations led to a man named Bernard Laroche, who was actually the cousin of Gregory's father. Authorities believe that Bernard had some involvement in the crime after handwriting experts stated that his writing matched with that of the letter. He was arrested in November of 1984 before being released in February of 1985. Bernard was adamant that they had the wrong man, but it seemed as though Jean-Marie was convinced that Bernard was the killer as he vowed to take his life. Then the very next month, on the 25th, Gregory's own mother, Christine, was now suspected of being involved in Gregory's death. Those handwriting experts had moved on from Bernard and now suspected Christine as being a likely match to the writing on the letter. And just 4 days later, on the 29th, Jean-Marie actually shot and killed Bernard right as he left home. Jean-Marie received a 5-year prison sentence for this murder, but he was released in December of 1987 after serving half of it. But back to Christine, she was actually charged for Gregory's death in July of 1985. Obviously, Christine was outraged. At the time, she was pregnant and went nearly 2 weeks without eating as a sort of way to display her discontent towards the accusation. She was eventually released though after it was cited in court that the evidence was poor and that there was no coherent motive. As a result of all this drama, Christine had a miscarriage resulting in the loss of one of her twins. Over the following decade or two, the case would see minor developments that didn't really affect the case's progress in the end. This included DNA testing of the letters Gregory's family received, as well as other pieces of evidence, including the rope that was used on Gregory. The results were inconclusive. Then in June of 2017, another 3 relatives of Gregory's were also arrested. This included Gregory's aunt, a great-aunt, and a great-uncle. And all 3 were released about a month after being detained. And about a month after that, the magistrate who led the first investigation into the case, Jean-Michel Lambert, took his own life as a result of the overwhelming pressure the case brought along when it was reopened. All in all, the case was just a big fat mess. This entry, titled "Giant Shrimp in the Laundry Room," refers to a mysterious cryptid from Washington that is pretty obscure. This cryptid can be traced back to the late 40s, where it was mentioned in a phone call transcription. The call was made by a woman named Virginia Staples. So in 1948, Virginia was living on Denny Street in Bremerton, Washington. The apartment that she was staying in had this large basement with holes in the walls. She often used this room as a place to hang up her wet laundry, but every single time she went down there, she felt that she was being watched, possibly from those holes. One day, she had this dreadful feeling that someone was behind her, so she turned around and she saw something. In the phone call she made, she was quoted saying, "I was so scared I can still feel it. I couldn't move." In one of the huge holes in the basement, there stood this thing. Virginia went on to describe a bright orange creature that stood at about 5 feet tall with thin spider-like legs and antennae. This sight freaked Virginia out. She sprinted out of the basement, got in her car, and drove to Seattle, which is about a 2-hour drive, in order to stay with a relative. The only thing that I could find that looked anything like it was this tiny little shrimp. It's unclear what exactly Virginia did after that encounter, but apparently she didn't go back to her apartment for years. And when she did eventually return, the complex had been torn down. Obviously, there are very few people that believe Virginia's story, even amongst cryptid enthusiasts. But she's still unable to explain what exactly she saw, and to this day, she's gonna continue saying that it was a giant shrimp.